When you picture India's capital today, you likely think of wide avenues, grand parliament buildings, and diplomatic enclaves. But that polished, modern grid we call New Delhi is only a tiny, recent sliver of a much larger beast. Over the centuries, this specific patch of earth hasn't hosted one continuous settlement. It is a geographic graveyard, a place where 7 distinct cities were destroyed, only for the next empire to build their capital directly on top of the ruins. Long before the written record, local folklore tells the story of an ancient ruler named King Dilu. A sage instructed him to drive a massive iron spike deep into the earth, aiming straight for the head of the serpent god Vasuki, who was said to hold up the world. The king couldn't resist checking the work. He ordered the massive spike pulled up and found its tip dripping with blood. Panicking, he tried to hammer it back down to secure his reign, but it wouldn't go all the way in. The spike remained loose, or dilly in the local tongue. Because the nail was dilly, the sage warned, the king's grip on the land would be loose too. Over time, the word dilly slowly morphed into Delhi. And while the story is a myth, you can still visit the Qutub Minar complex today and see a massive 1,500-year-old iron pillar that famously refuses to rust. Many locals still quietly point to it as the king's fabled nail. But the actual history of how this city got its name and its shape is far darker than ancient folklore. As the geographic entry gate to the Indian subcontinent, whoever controlled Delhi controlled the wealth of the plains, and that meant centuries of endless, brutal warfare. The verifiable historical record starts in the 11th century. King Anungpal Tomar built a settlement called Lalkot. It didn't stay his for long. By the year 1206, invaders from the northwest had seized the territory, passing control to the Ghulam or slave dynasty. The new rulers quickly realized that being the gateway to India made them a massive target. When the Mongol Empire began sweeping across Asia, Sultan Alauddin Khalji knew Lalkot's old walls wouldn't hold. He constructed an entirely new, heavily fortified city called Siri. The strategy worked. Siri's massive defenses repelled 5 massive invasions from the Mongols. But dynasties in Delhi rarely survived long. When the Tughlaq took power, the brilliant but deeply eccentric Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq decided to build yet another fortress, Tughlaqabad. He ultimately considered his own creation cursed and completely abandoned it. The true curse arrived in 1398. The warlord Timur swept down from Samarkand, drawn by the immense wealth accumulating in the Delhi region. Timur's arrival in 1398 brought total evisceration. His armies slaughtered the population and stripped the buildings of everything valuable, leaving the capital so desolate it took a full century to recover its population. The early sultans thought thick stone walls would guarantee their survival. Instead, the promise of a wealthy, heavily fortified prize only attracted larger, more ruthless armies, reducing generations of imperial ambition to jagged rubble. In 1526, the Mughal Empire took the throne. Following Emperor Humayun's sudden death from a tragic fall down his library stairs, his descendants began a building campaign that introduced a level of architectural symmetry the region had never seen. By the mid-1600s, Emperor Shah Jahan grew tired of the cramped, narrow streets of his capital in Agra. He wanted wide avenues where his royal processions could be seen in all their glory. So he moved his court back to the Delhi region, laying the foundations for a spectacular new city, Shah Jahanabad. This was the absolute zenith of medieval Indian wealth. Centered around the massive Red Fort, the city boasted sprawling, vibrant markets like Chandni Chowk, lined with canals and filled with merchants trading silk and silver. But the grandeur masked a brutal political reality. When Shah Jahan's ruthless son Aurangzeb seized power, he used those exact same beautiful streets for terror. He paraded his defeated brother Dara Shikoh in chains on an elephant through Chandni Chowk before executing him, and later beheaded the Sikh guru Tegh Bahadur in the very same market square. Aurangzeb's brutality fractured the empire. By 1739, under the weak rule of Emperor Muhammad Shah, nicknamed Rangila for his love of luxury, the Iranian conqueror Nadir Shah saw an opportunity and marched his forces directly into the weakened capital. Nadir Shah's troops locked down the city and initiated a horrific massacre, carting off hundreds of millions of rupees and treasure, including the legendary Kohinoor diamond. The 1739 invasion effectively erased Mughal wealth, turning a global center of culture into a scene of mass theft. The final collapse of the Mughals came in 1857, when the British crushed a massive rebellion and assumed absolute control. Decades later, they decided they needed a completely new, European-styled administrative capital to project their ultimate authority over the subs. His mandate was to design a massive, highly ordered city that merged grand European layouts with Indian architectural motifs like stone lattices and domes. But to build this perfect city, Lutyens first had to erase what was already there. In 1913, British engineers reshaped the Earth, using massive quantities of dynamite to blast away and flatten a prominent ridge known as Ricina Hill. This aerial image shows the massive scale of the master plan. Across 10,000 acres of freshly flattened terrain, Lutyens laid out exactly 169 geometric blocks, intersected by sweeping diagonal avenues. This second image reveals the tight, rigid grids surrounding the newly built circular Parliament House. By 1931, the executive buildings were complete, and the British officially inaugurated this manufactured zone as New Delhi. And that is exactly why the map of India's capital looks the way it does today. The region is permanently fractured. On one side lies the dense, chaotic remnants of Shah Jahan's 17th century Old Delhi, and right next to it sits Lutyens' carefully blasted and paved New Delhi. 7 times the city was leveled, and 7 times it was dragged back to life. Delhi remains a survivor, a patchwork of bricks and borders built upon the debris of previous failures. To walk its streets today is to stand upon a sequence of ruins, each layer telling a story of how an empire ended. If you've ever explored the hidden corners of Delhi, tell us which era you found below, and subscribe to History Connect for more deep dives into the past.